So this session will be about building support among women and men, bringing men into the discussion as well. There was a CEO Champions workshop last night on this very topic, and there were some very interesting conclusions that came out of that. Before we get into those, I'd like to introduce the speakers who will participate in this discussion. We have Sandrine Devillard, the director of McKinsey & Company France. I'd like to... Thank you. We'll bring everyone to the stage first, and then Muriel Pénicaud, the CEO of Business France and the French ambassador for international investment. And finally, Louis Desazars, who is the CEO of Shiseido EMEA, and before that he was the head of NARS in New York. Oh, I thought of, yeah. I would like a chair.
Chair, please.
No,
or
my
it's
chair
musical chairs.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I would like a chair, actually.
Is it for the men or for the speakers?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's for all of us, but we can start and eventually I'll have my chair.
Okay, it's coming.
It's coming. Okay. Well, we'll start with Ms. Devillard, who is going to set up the context for this discussion, and she will share with us the most important conclusions of the workshop last night. So, give it over to you, Sandrine.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here again this year. So, I'm delighted to share some of the results of our Women Matter survey and set the stage for the panel discussion. It's going to be just a glimpse. For the one who are interested, we're going to have a presentation in the Odeon at 11:15, I guess. So don't hesitate to join us. So last year in Deauville, we shared the result of our Power of Parity reports. At the time, we looked at gender equalities throughout the world, and we found out that there were still huge gender inequalities throughout the world. Indeed, we looked at 15 gender inequality indicators and found out that out of 95 countries that we surveyed, more than 40 had huge or very important inequality on more than 50% of our indicators. So it's really substantial. We also found out that even in Western Europe, we had huge inequalities. And those inequalities were mostly in the field of work. So this year, as part of our Women Matter report, we decided to focus on the inequalities in the workplace. So let me start by giving you a few numbers. $12 trillion GDP additional, and $2 trillion in Western Europe. What is this? This is the additional economic potential of closing the gap on women and employment. So if we were to close the gender inequality and in the workplace, we would capture 12 trillion in the world and 2 trillion in Europe. We're talking about 1 percentage point of growth every year for all the countries. Obviously, capturing this opportunity requires to address two big inequalities. The first one is the part-time, and the second one is the participation in the unpaid work. Indeed, in Europe, women do 2 times more unpaid care work than men. We're talking about 4 hours and 29 minutes for women on average, and only 2 hours and 18 minutes for men on average. Bear in mind that in MENA or in South Asia, the difference in terms of unpaid care work between men and women is 5 times more. So still a very long way to go. And last but not least, 17. This is the percentage of women sitting on the executive committees of large corporations throughout Europe. It's progressing. The good news is that it has been progressing on average by 1 percentage point or 1.5 percentage point over the past 10 years. So if you assume that the pace of change will be the same, we're talking about gender equality at the top of corporations in 20 to 25 years. So it means we'll have more Women's Forum in Deauville, unfortunately, for many, many years. So What's happening? How can we make change happen in corporations? This year, we surveyed above 330 companies throughout Europe and in Turkey. We went very granular. We looked at their funnel. We looked at what the measures they were implementing, and we even surveyed their employees. What have we found out? We found out that progress is very, very slow to happen. While companies implement a lot of things, only very few are capturing and are closing the gap and bringing women all the way to the top. So, and most importantly, when we surveyed the employees, they found out, I mean, they're very aware of the situation. This is what they told us. 30% of them told us that they think their company is committed to gender diversity. And you will see commitment to gender diversity is critical. More worryingly, 12% of them said that their company was doing what it takes to improve gender diversity. And last but not least, more than 60% of them said that they didn't know exactly how to work on gender diversity at their individual level. So, we also looked at best-in-class companies. What do we define as best-in-class company? We define best-in-class companies in our samples as companies having above 30% of women in their executive committee or a woman CEO. And those best-in-class companies, they do things a little bit differently than the rest. And they do, in particular, 3 things differently. Oops. Number 1, persistence. You know, it takes time and commitment over the year to make change happen. Companies which have made progress on this topic have started 3, 4, 5 years ago. It's not something that happens overnight. Oops, sorry, it's going. Whoop. Number 2, CEO commitment. Only the company which really had a CEO committed, meaning a CEO who personally, you know, monitor the progress of gender diversity, walk the talks, and cascade this down to the entire company, only those companies can really make a progress on this front. And last but not least, holistic change program. We're not talking about one-off measures. We're not talking about series of initiatives. We're talking about implementing a full ecosystem. It is a change program. Just like any change program, you know, you need to start with the diagnosis. You need to implement the measures that really tackle your bottlenecks. And then you need also to have a change story to explain where you are, where you want to go, and why it makes sense for business reason. Not only for ethical reason, but to business reason. You need to have people in the organization, change agent, using this story, cascading down the story to the entire organization. So, that's why, you know, there's no such thing as a silver bullet. So building on these learnings, yesterday, 45 of CEO champions, you know, gathered and started discussing and looking at how we can make change happen. They answered 2 questions. Number 1, how can the CEO make a difference and build commitment at all levels of the organization, including men? And number 2, how can we evolve the performance and leadership model to ensure that we're creating a much more inclusive workplace and diverse? And I'm not going to spoil the answer, but let me just highlight a few of the measures that were mentioned at the time. CEOs must be personally involved in recruiting and evaluation process and challenge the shortage of candidates. CEOs could be a role model on work-life balance. Beyond CEO commitment, companies should build the board commitment. We should implement reverse mentoring and sponsorship. We have to implement gender debiasing to make sure that both men and women conduct recruiting interviews and evaluation process. The targets and the incentives should not only be based on the achievement on the KPIs, but also recognize the effort first, to recognize the fact that it takes time and commitment. And finally, we need to make it a business issue and not a gender issue. So I'm going to turn now to 2 of our representatives and ask them to expand on those points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So Thank you very much for setting the stage. These are some of the issues that we're dealing with, a lot of progress, but still a lot of room for improvement. So now I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Pénicaud and Mr. Desazars. The two of you share a common goal, obviously bringing men into the discussion and recruiting their support to promote the advancement of women. But you have very different backgrounds and also varying perspectives on how men can and should be involved. So Ms. Pénicaud, before you joined Business France, you were an executive vice president at Danone. And one of the initiatives that you founded there was a program, a leadership program called EVE, that looked at a lot of these issues. So you've already been involved in a lot of small group settings that involved men. And I'm wondering, what are some of the most surprising things that came out of those meetings over the years that you might not have expected?
Thank you. As Sandrine said, we are making progress, no doubt, especially on boards, I would say, especially boards in Europe and Americas, 25%. But at the top management level and middle management, it is extremely slow. So the question is really how we can accelerate, because as you said, we love to be here, but we would love to be here to celebrate, not only to battle. And based on that, one of the questions is how to involve men. Because if you want a sustainable change, first, you never know, you can have reversed directions, but also to accelerate, we need involvement of men. But you have to do it in a way that is not just copying what we are doing. And when we created the EVE program, which is a women leadership development program, involving today 2,000 women leaders in business and 20% of men. And that was on purpose. We thought we needed to make them experiment the reverse experiment that most women in business, except in Shiseido, do experiment. And in this program, what we have founded is that first, from the men perspective, there are a lot of fears. Second, there are a lot of ignorance of the situation. And third, there's kind of inertia, but because they don't see the need, they don't see the urgency. And so you have to tackle those three ones, the fear, the ignorance, and the inertia. And for the fear, I have a little anecdote for you. When we launched the first EVE program, so we were in a room with 300 women and 60 men. And so I asked Franck Ribou, the CEO of, the chairman and CEO of Danone at this time, of course, to come. He was very supportive of the program, was a real sponsor. But when he came to the room, he was at the first row here, waiting his time. And just, he told me, I'm scared. I said, how can you be scared? He's speaking everywhere in the world every day. He's never scared of just normal. And he said, what are they going to think of me? I feel different. So I told him, welcome to our world. And that for me was enlightening, because all the men involved in EVE said he has totally changed their perspective. They didn't realize what it means. They didn't realize the added value they could get from different conversations. So they got enlightened also for their personal life. So that's just an anecdote. I think we'll go back to the discussion how you can tackle fears, how you can tackle, you see the benefits, which benefits, how you can raise the awareness. So we go back to that. But I think it's very important to, if we want to be efficient, to start by understanding the perception of men.
And we'll get to some of those conclusions and what we can actually do a little bit later on in the discussion. But the fear might be a good segue to speaking with Mr. Desazars, because you work in a company that looks a lot like the Women's Forum, 80% women. So you face challenges that are a bit different than a lot of the CEOs of, say, Dassault or Thales. What are some of the challenges specific to working in a company that actually is 80% women?
So let me first say thank you for inviting me, and we were so happy as a Shiseido Group, being a top cosmetic company in the world, to take part in for the first time in this forum. So as you said, we are 80% women group. More than 50% of our women are in the top executive are women. So it is a very specific situation. And what I would like to say first, it works. What I can tell you, it is very strong, it is very powerful to have this diversity within a cosmetic group. And I was very happy to see in the conclusion or the research that was done by McKinsey showing and rationalizing what the added value of having a diversity at the leadership, showing the behaviors that women show when it comes to people development, when it comes to having a more collaborative environment. I mean, being able to have those kind of studies to educate, break barriers is extremely useful for me as a leader, and we take that this matter very seriously. So what kind of issue do we have having this reverse situation? I mean, as you said, I think balance is very important, and we have some category of some departments within the company where we have a very hard time having diversity, where it's 100% women, and where we are trying to hire men, and we have a hard time hiring men. So that's the kind of situation we're having. But otherwise, it's now I would say it's a very powerful and it's a very good place to be, especially when you sell and where you're really focused on selling to women when it's your main consumer.
Okay, so we all agree that we're having to deal with a lot of fears, misconceptions, and awareness is the first step. But we don't have too much time left here, so I'd like to move quickly to what are some of the concrete steps that CEOs specifically, but also leaders throughout the business world can take to change these fears and misconceptions.
So first, from my experience in the public and private sector and from the CEO Champions workshop of yesterday, it's clear that first on fear, you absolutely need to share and to show the benefits, personal benefits, business benefits. For instance, on business benefits, McKinsey has done a great job the last year showing at the global dimension the effect on the business and the growth and the GDP. But some companies also have done a real laboratory on that. I'm thinking of Sodexo. They have done a study worldwide in all your managers, and they have proved that all their diverse team, from the gender perspective, were much more efficient from a business perspective, profitability, growth, brand image, employer image. So that's something, we need the business case, because then we are allies, men and women, because it's good for the business. So that's first point. Second is personal benefits. It seems less obvious because many men will fear that they have less job opportunities. In fact, it's not true. If we together we grow the business, we have more opportunity, first. And second, and we are helped by the new generation, we need to ally with the new generation. A lot of men want also a more balanced work life and a balanced life between work and personal life. And that's it's something that can be a benefit for men and women to be more involved together at the work dimension, but also more balance in our lives. And so that's on the fear. On the awareness, I think you need to experiment. After the story I told, Frank has been a fantastic sponsor. He understood something, and he said, I will do differently with my daughter too. So look at the daughter of the CEOs. They are allies too. Because I think it has to be the business, the brand, but also the human perception of immersion. And something very good is the sponsoring. When we say sponsoring, it's not only mentoring, it's being advocates of women development. But just we experiment that at bigger scale. In fact, it's a reverse mentoring at the same time. When somebody advocates for somebody, he will or she will realize what the value of the person, but also the challenges in which he or she is. So I think it's a developing sponsoring. It's a good way. And finally, for the inertia, I think the issue is to involve not only the CEO, but through the CEO, the whole management. That's the key if we want to make it big, sustainable, and really successful. And for that, we discussed a lot yesterday on all the incentive bonus schemes, and we arrive at the conclusion that they absolutely need to involve the question of gender diversity, but probably in two steps. One, to measure and reward the efforts, the initiative, and second, the result. Why not the result initially? Because if you start asking result in 1 year on this topic, you will do stupid promotion, and it will be counterproductive. So first efforts, and initiative, second results. I think that's a quite of the a part of the tools, and I think also a call. Being now in the public sector and dealing with governments everywhere in the world all the time, I feel sometimes back in the past because the number of times where I'm the only female in discussion is very high. So we need to do some global Eve public programs too.
So maybe one of the ways to do that is to show men, as you mentioned earlier, what they can get out of it, what's in it for them. And maybe, Mr. Desazars, you could speak to that and other conclusions and steps that you might take yourself and advocate for others to take.
So I totally agree with what Muriel just said. I think first it begins with the CEO, and the conclusions of yesterday's workshop was very clear. The CEO, sincere, and I insist on this word, sincere commitment and belief that this is a crucial topic. It begins with that. Then it's all a matter of course, education, raising awareness, all of that. But if there's one more thing which is very important when I think of Shiseido Group, you know, as a Japanese group, we think very long term, and we try to see what are the roadblocks that will prevent us from being there 100 years' time. And there's one thing we've identified as a major roadblock is demography. And when you see in Japan, it's 50% of our business, and with the birth rate today in Japan, if it continues the way it is, the population will decrease by 30% by 2050. So it's a dramatic. It is really a disaster for the country. So we need, and so it could be really a danger for our business. So we really we are responsible as a corporation to make sure that women do not feel guilty of having kids and being able to work, understanding that they can still have kids and go up the ladder. I think it is crucial. And so we have been championing in Japan, and we need to do it also in Europe now, having childcare facilities in all the plants, making sure now in Japan they shut down the lights at 7 o'clock in the evening so women can go back home and take care of the kids and their husband. And so it's really something which we have to. I see some people laughing. Men too, yes.
Men too. The women don't only leave at 7, the men also leave at 7.
This is unconscious bias. So that's the kind of thing I think we need to, working on guilt, working on that is crucial as a head of corporation.
Unfortunately, we already are going to have to wrap this up. I just wanted to ask Ms. Devillard, has she had any final conclusions to add, anything else that came out of the workshop last night, but we are
I think that in the short time we covered the point. What's very important is to be able to embark the entire organization and to have change agents throughout the organization. So the CEO commitment is the first step, but then you need at all levels of the organization to embark everybody so that everybody, you know, even in line position, understand why it matters for business reason. And until this happens, change of pace will be super slow and way too slow.
One of the interesting things that came out of the small group discussion I was in yesterday in the meeting was this idea that we need to share the data. I mean, I come from a profession where everyone is cynical, sometimes rightly so, but they're not going to believe that change is necessary unless you show them why and what other people can get out of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to cue now a video that will begin the next session on women in sports.